so. You can hear me? Yes, Junip. He paused. Lorne, Junip shouted, and all Lorne could see was her wide smile on the screen. Count down with me, Junip, with your fingers. I want to see how bad the latency is. The what? Just count down, Lorne said with his hands spread wide on the screen. They both began counting, but it was quickly obvious there was a few-second delay between them. The yellow artificial light from his janitorial closet-sized corridor made every shadow in his youthful face expand. It made him look more serious than he was, or at least more than he wanted to look right now. Juniper was in the living room. Behind her was a large projection alternating different pictures. The image transitioned from Junip holding a guinea pig to a family portrait, with 16-year-old Lorne next to his 2 elder and 1 younger brother. One of Lorne's elder brothers was holding an infant Juniper. Where are you now? How much longer before you land? She said with excitement. This is my last day and half in the ship. Well, this ship at least. His eyes rolled. This will be the last night I get to talk to anyone outside the mission for a few days, Junip. Are you still as excited as you were when you first got picked for the job? Junip asked in soft voice. Of course. I guess I just miss you guys, Lorne said while stretching his arms to both sides of this narrow room. Is he mean? Junip asked almost nervously. To this, Lorne snickered and gestured her to quiet down. No, well, you remember Mr. Z from your recreation center, Lorne said, looking as if someone could hear him. No one could. She did not need to know that, though, because there could be, and these were habits she was better off having. The one who coaches the same team his son is the lead offense of, and always yells at people for bringing guests in. She paused with a cringe. Mr. Bruck is like Mr. Z. Wow. No. Lorne realized he may have gone too far. He is not. Well, I have not met him personally yet. He just likes things a very particular way. The expectations can be daunting, but I know what he wants. What does he want? Juniper asked. I guess he just wants to look good. Lorne looked around his steel box with the poorly cushioned roll-up mattress slightly pivoted off the mold bed, frame that fused into the adjacent corner. If this ship were not a rental transport vessel, he would not have put it past Mr. Bruck to have his room bugged. If he did know of Lorne after all. This pathetic excuse for an accommodation was everything Lorne needed to know about Mr. Bruck's intentions. He did not need it to be good, just to look good. Lorne's trials and tribulations climbing out lower communes by no means created a snob, though the amount of wealth Molesco has made it hard for Lorne to fathom why they would take such an outdated shuttle to escort Mr. Bruck. That is easy. I can write good things about him too. She giggled into the tablet she was communicating with. It might not be the truth, though. Well, a real journalist always tells the truth, Junip, Lorne said, shuffling his tablet watch until it projected a holographic image against the wall. A large dark grey rock with one smooth side and a black mechanical mass protruding out the other side appeared in and out of focus as it projected the image against his metallic wall. As it focused more, it was clear enough to see floating text that had arrow icons pointing to various aspects of the mechanical mass. One arrow showed the entrance, another at the battery hub. Then the last one was pointing at the core of the metallic structure that seemed to cling onto this asteroid like one of the many bolts surrounding the portholes. That text said Extraction Refinery, the carefully chosen name for an asteroid mining facility. The asteroid in question is known as Aureus K. Aureus K was a Trojan asteroid stagnant in the gravitational fold of Mars' Lagrangian points. It follows the orbit of the Sun. However, the asteroid is destabilizing due to gravitational equalizers installed by man. Aureus K was one of the first dozen asteroids to be mined. Neglected and left behind for lack of profitable resources, it became exactly what the universe intended it to be once again. Just a rock. That was until a certain resource was discovered that changed the entire face of space travel in the 2320S Aureus K asphalt. A property that liquefies into an incredibly moldable product and hardens into an obsidian-like black metal asphalt with a combination of select amines, transferred to a gas state. The material was quickly marketed for buildings and space travel vehicles. Artificial intelligence advanced laser systems could only prevent damage from debris to a certain extent. At certain point, industries shifted their focus from preventing inevitable collisions with having fast-acting hole-patching technology. Casualties did not decrease, but operations were completed. Regulations to have excessive quantities of this epoxy material, also known as Mull's mold, replaced having adequate debris. Laser defense systems. A huge proponent to this shift in policy was the entrepreneurial forces that made it an industry standard. Mull's mold monopolized the extraction refinery method of farming FM asteroids, FM meaning fast mobile. This brought an immeasurable amount of wealth to Mr. Bruck's predecessors. Like most dynasties, internal decay led to the inevitable and predicted feuds that usually occur during executive power shifts within corporate hierarchies. Bruck had inherited the company after becoming elected through a decade-long committee mutiny. Now he stood as the current chief CEO of the Moles Co., the producer of Moles Mold. The economic environment, catalyzed through corrupt state committees and extreme compartmentalization to ensure specialization from artificially intelligent guides, provided the perfect environment to split up humanity between the state-sanctioned monopolies. Moles Co. was the company that had jurisdiction of most North American communes dedicated to work and service. With that, there are still thousands of franchised extensions of other businesses, yet they are all owned by one of few parent companies. The remaining political parties divided into directives chosen by two different committees that operate on AI agendas that consistently conflicted with each other in order to sustain an apparent checks and balance system. By the 2170, there was no question on either side of political spectrum that artificial intelligence was more fit to lead. To where we shall be led was the question that remained. Overpopulation encourages the committee-selected directives to allow for a ruthless expansion that gives corporations even more room to rule as they pleased. With that, these business empires just had to appease the state enough to sustain influence and jurisdiction long enough to expand into new sectors to stack their influence and capital. One party maintained the communal duty of expansion through the might of commerce and free market. The other embraced the individualist movement of private academies, freelancing, and smaller non-corporate companies with the protection of regulations by the state. The constant tug battle between right and left-wing ideology that had plagued the dissolved nations of the world into one remaining union had been replaced, with their infidelities a fair child. In that child lived the hyper-controlling qualities of a totalitarian state that sustained off the commerce and resource accumulation that could only be acquired through the crudest form of unregulated capitalism. The current elections, which determined which communes were under which corporation's jurisdiction, have brought space travel practices to the forefront of political talk once more. So, Mr. Bruck orchestrated a trip recruiting Lorne from his independent academy in journalism through his current employment in the Global Examiner. While Lorne would love to believe that he was chosen for his writing abilities alone, he knew there had to be another reason for him being selected. Could it be that Mr. Bruck knew his older brothers were also asteroid miners? Does he know they died due to company negligence? And you can do that? Junip asked, breaking Lorne's thought pattern. Do what? Tell the truth and make him look good. Junip's eyes were low. Lorne waited for her eyes to meet his once more. Let's talk about something different, he said. How is school? Her eyes finally raised. I know you heard. Hey, do not worry about getting transferred, Junip. Just take it day by day. You can score out of it if they have reason to think the results are off. Just keep focusing on your current courses. Lorne assured fair. Actually, I need help with my homework. She smiled lightly. Literature again. Lorne grinned, knowing it was his specialty. No, this time history. Easy if you make it interesting, Junip, Lorne said, leaning in on the screen while tapping his watch projection off. Well, what unit are you on? Is it foreign or domestic history? It's just a multiple choice assignment online for domestic and foreign policy. Lorne looked at the 11-year-old, Junip, with amazement. She was already learning about the complicated world they existed in. Multiple choice. Well, let's get this started, Lorne said. Okay. Junip began. When did the UHE begin? The Union of Human Development was a reaction to the 6-month war of 2027. There is an answer about it being made by altruistic leaders of corporations after World War III. 6th-month war, World War III. It's the same thing, Junip. But I do not know if I would give corporations credit. Lorne paused, remembering he did not have much room to expand. Good for you, Lorne, because it's multiple choice, Junip said while clicking an option on the tablet. What is the significance of the Manster Uprising? Tyrese Manster created the AP Convention, which allocated which state would focus on what resource-based of artificial intelligence directives. Lorne looked at the pad to see Junip rolling her eyes. Lorne, I am 11. Is it the one about it ended all Earth wars or not? Junip brushed him. Yes. It made it so we stopped fighting for resources on Earth, and sovereign states began to merge into one unified nation across the globe. Lorne could not help but to over-explain. So why is there wars in space? Junip asked. Because if given the territory, resources, and self-proclaimed agency to do what they want, certain corporations act above the state and... Wait. Junip, is this a school question? Lorne felt tricked. No, but knowledge is knowledge, Junip said with a head tilt. Next question. What is the Armada Act of 2443? It is the reason the state issues military protection for the elected corporation. When rogues, business starting illegally mining and stealing resources leading to communal deficits. So, it's the reason why we do not get retirement? Junip asked. Everyone gets retirement, Junip. We just overspent, so we all have to chip in until the debt's clear. So, we all have to work extra hard to make up for some lost product because people decided to break the rules and steal from our elected corporation. Well, there was fighting. That is really expensive to do in space, Junip. Lorne felt uneasy. He looked at the small intercom in his room. The small speaker was a black circle with dozens of little holes that seemed to stare back at him. Is this also not a real question? I just asked what the Armada Act was. So, I am going to go with the answer that says something about the agreement between state and altruist entrepreneurs to combine military power to fight piracy and off-Earth rebellions. Seems like you got this homework yourself. Lorne smiled. She pouted back. The screen fluttered grey and blue. Lorne panicked, realizing this may be the last outward transmission he had. Junip I. The screen went black and a prompt read mandatory brief. Lorne felt uncertain. Did his poor little sister think he had abruptly disconnected after losing interest in helping her? He stood up in the room. He glanced out the porthole, which was approximately 14 centimeters thick. Pure blackness with a slight illumination. His section of the shuttle was clearly not facing Mars. Lorne stepped out his dorm chamber to hear the mumbling of unfamiliar voices echoing from the intercom. Brief room that projected against the hall's interface monitor. The phrase mandatory brief displayed. Lorne shuffled his hair into place and hobbled back to his dorm, where he quickly flattened the wrinkles out the grey thermal issued to every person on arrival. He ran down the halls and climbed up a ladder that led to a metal corridor, not unlike the one he just ran through below a level. At the end of the hall, he presented his sleep-deprived, puffy eye was scanned by a wall-mounted security clearance. A vibrations and gust of pressure knocked Lorne's newly fixed bedhead back to its original chaotic state. The doors slid open to see an even cruder metal box than the already soulless infrastructure of a room he had slept in. In it were 6 benches, or 2 columns of 3 rows on both sides. Through the center there was a walkway, podium, and a black screen behind it. As Lorne made his way through the scarcely filled benches, one particular person caught his eye. Or more so, he caught theirs. Lorne. A whisper from the folks emerged. Lorne's eyes focused on the perpetrator. It is me, Marston. What the fuck are you doing here? Oh, wow. Is that you? Lorne said, trying to sound enthusiastic. Yeah, it is me. Now answer my question. Press. Working for Global Examiner, Lorne said as he sat next to Marston. Okay. I am doing press too, Marston said with a sense of pride. Really? Did not know they acquired other outlets for the ride-along? Nope. I am all in-house. Mull's finest. That was sarcasm, dingus. I guess that gift of the gab got you somewhere, Lorne said. Smart for you to climb the company ladder. I think we both can think of a handful of dipshits that fell face first trying to go the other route. I don't see any scars on your face. You fared well. Besides, you know damn well how I got here, Marston chuckled. You have any idea how envious the rest of the guys I went to Orville Academy with are of the amount of freedom someone at Examiner's got? Well then how? The hell did you make it this far if freedom of speech is your gripe? Lorne said, looking at his old companion. Marston leaned forward and gave a menacing grin. Because these fucking clowns do not have the self-awareness to recognize satire. I'll write an article praising the legitimacy of the stripe badge system, and people up top will eat it up without an inkling of my sarcasm. I think we are pretty much in the same boat in terms of limitations, Lorne answered. Only you say it is a lack of self-awareness. I think everyone is very aware. Only what we should be aware of, we choose to take pride in, because it somehow validates everything we have done thus far. Glad to hear you found some upward mobility and can be optimistic. Marston was looking at the drain in the center of the room. Optimistic is a new way to see it. Well, look at us both here. Seems you have been doing well also. Only I would advise you to cut the sarcasm out for this trip. The only thing you will get is some respect from other smarter seers and an ulcer every time a supervisor calls you for an evaluation. Look, Lorne, I have been on Earth and will continue out my contracts there after I'm done here. They ain't going to do anything to me? Why is that? They can't. Too much attention. I do not need to do much to stay under the radar when the company is trying to get the commune press ready for elections. He waited for a reaction from Lorne and continued, I would assume you are very aware of that nuance. But of course, you are not here to bring forth light in a shadowy place, are you, Lorne? Mr. Examiner, a true keen observer you are. I will fill out voucher for you to join the Examiner, Lorne said dryly. Marston scoffed. After getting the real scoop on the purpose of your assignment, I do not feel so disappointed in myself for not looking for a way out. The freedom did sound nice, but now I feel indifferent. Buddy, it looks like you work for us. You were brought here to butter this operation up like you did in Memoirs of the Refineries. You read that? Lorne asked with surprise. He wondered how much Marston knew. Yeah, I nearly shit myself when I realized it was from you. But hey, you seem to have used that piece to elevate your career out of those slums. Do not know why you would volunteer for that rough of a transfer penalty, though. All just to work for this company again in a different way. It will be worth it if it works out, Lorne said, sure of himself. Well, it better work. Because for now you are sitting next to an Oval Academy alumni who can humbly accept his G-level residence without the refineries. That fiasco must have really fucking sucked. Fuck, I really am trapped, Lorne said. Seems like those placements tests actually do mean something. Hey, if you are going to start pitying yourself, I take it back. Look at the bright side, your original placement score did not even land you in Oval Academy. You are here now next to All Marston, so do not feel bad. I am not talking about the press gig. Lorne's eyes seemed to zoom in on a display sign that read Asteroid Mine Arrival Brief Room, but his eyes truly only repeated the words, Asteroid Mine. Lorne looked at the large monitor screen sitting in the center wall as it displayed those words. It's about the right time. There is only one way I see out of this. Me too. Marston continued very quietly, and when the time comes, I want to be there to watch it all crumble. So, I can be the one to tell everyone, everything. The stainless steel room had large carbon-based ribbed gaskets on every auto-slide door. When they opened, a small pressure equalizer went off, emitting a vibrating sound. The room stopped filling after the 12th person, most of which were engineers and accountants working for Mulls. A brief moment later, a video displaying the protocol for extraction site mounting the following day appeared on the black screen. The display demonstrated a transport shuttle. In a screw motion will land into Aureus Key. The tip will enter a cavity lined with threads that allow the entire shuttle to mount on the mine facility that protrudes off of the Aureus K asteroid. Like a massive 16-floored and 2-kilometer-wide bolt penetrating into the surface, another 13 levels. While attaching to the top mount and literally screwing into the infrastructure in a massive spiral motion, the headquarters will begin bridging all of the entrance chambers. Once gravity levels are equalized to match the field, they would be able to enter the exclusion chamber and enter field work on Aureus K. As the video wrapped up, the door gaskets vibrated and distinctive footsteps intruded on everyone's full attention. Behind them stood a tall, broad-shouldered man with seriousness ingrained into every crease of his face. Though he seemed to try to avoid the attention, his steps were crude like a marching soldier, like a marching fascist. His clothes were pressed with a level of care that implied he left very little stones left unturned. His badge was covered in stripes signifying rank. The video ended, and the 12 in the room chatted calmly. The man cleared his voice. Good morning, folks. I am head administrator of the non-terrestrial security logistics for our beloved leader. It is an honor to be at your service. I just had a few questions due to some unexpected absences. The man spoke direct and precise, as if he did not know how to behave otherwise. It was a distinct dialogue. He had not had a residence on Earth in over 25 years. He carried a fast and assertive dialect that was common amongst soldiers in the corporate proxy wars that emerge every now and then in uncharted or less established territories. I bet he rolls over for a dog treat and stripe on that badge, Marston said under his breath. The man scanned the room and said, How many engineers do we have currently not working for Mulls Co? No one answered. Medical examiners? One person rose his hand with uncertainty. I mean, I was, but per our conversation, if you remember, we discussed my transfer. So technically I work for Mulls now. Ah, yes, you made the right choice, Mr. Hejam. You can put your hand down. How about press? Marston looked at Lorne. The man looked at Marston, then Lorne with the expectation of an answer. Press? Marston raised his hand slowly while also gesturing his head towards Lorne. 2 independents, the man said slowly and perplexed. No, sir, I am from Mulls, Marston said. Ah, what is your name? The man asked. Marston. Ah, yes, Marston. I am Simon. Now, next time listen before speaking. I said not working for Mulls. Not, Simon said. He then stood quietly. His eyes then rolled over to Lorne. With the gesture of his hand, he told Lorne to come forward and to sit at the empty bench in the rear that was directly in front of him. Lorne stood up, taking one last look at Marston. He then walked over and sat as Simon towered over him. You are an academy journalist? Simon asked. No. I come from an academy, but I work for Global Examiner in the business sector. You are not from Oval Academy? No, though I am aware they do have a journalist section, but it's mostly used for internal information. like congratulation articles on promotions or new developments within the company. What exactly is your purpose then? He said with a deliberation that transitioned from small talk to interrogation at a moment's notice. I work for Global Examiner, Lorne responded quickly. We understand that. I'm looking to understand what your purpose is here. To examine, Lorne said flatly. Then, after looking up to meet Simon's eyes, he realized he may have made an enemy. Our sector in business and commerce was commissioned by Mull's company to write a report about the pioneering mold mines and what's to come of the originals. This is one of the first asteroids to be sanctioned by the government to establish a patented sector. The state wants to pull the plug on this operation on providing resources and labor. Mulls want to expand on more promising asteroids, but there is a lot of debate on how to handle Aureus K, considering the state may allow another company to inherit the infrastructure if it finds Mulls Co. is no longer fit. Mulls as a company understands that an academy founded by the founder's son, Oval Mulad, will not suffice for the public relations ambassador. So I was chosen, presumably based our independent credibility, but really off my reputation I had accumulated after my romanticism of L-grade residence communes. Romanticism of L-grade residence is what earned you prestige amongst journalists. Simon scowled, then chuckled. It is an essential skill if you truly want to convey the reality and the perception of the matter. What is there to Roman? He stopped, realizing his interrogation had led him down a school of thought he was designed to snuff out. So you must understand that the reality must be that of the reality we collectively have agreed upon. The integrity of my work does not compromise, however, I never lose sight of the bigger picture. I am willing to do the job I was asked to do. I am aware of how things can be perceived, and I am aware that I was not chosen for this task because of a critical stance. I am here to merely acknowledge the existence of this operation. Lorne felt slightly dizzy after saying this. Listen. Lorne, yes? Yes, I am Lorne. Lorne, I can walk around the bush all day. I can tell you how I would prefer things or what things to leave in or out. However, I have never been an around-the-bush kind of guy. You understand that? Yes. Lorne met his eyes again. He had an assertive look even in details of his face that were out of his control. His dark hair was neatly cut, and his jowls made two perfect parallel lines that empathized his broad judging chin. Do you know what I tested as Lorne? My placement score, I mean. Clearly high considering you run the chief CEO security logistics. My placement score was 5 Poena. Poena, Lorne repeated. Not a lot of private sector career paths with that, I would imagine. Correct, Simon said. Wardens, drill sergeants, interrogation officers, and of course anti-espionage for military operations. Yes, entities that do not really have a place in the private sector unless there is Jonko, Lorne said. Jonko was a euphemism for a corporate proxy war, named after the Johnson County War, an event very much forgotten by the world, though historians revisited after recognizing the parallels that occurred in more contemporary times. Yes. Well, you know your placement scores. Are you currently looking for a transfer yourself? No. My little sister is awaiting her results. She has quite the personality, so I have been trying to get a jump on where she is getting sent off to. Well, you seem to have done yourself quite well. I would imagine she would follow suit. His tone, as it was most of the time, was certain. Well, I am an academy transfer myself, but I had to volunteer myself to the L residence work fields while the transfer took place. A bit of a disciplinary exchange for not going with the program. A bit. You must have not seen daylight for months. Surprised you did not get gutted alive by one of those Neanderthals in the refineries. It seemed as if though the compassion inside Simon was finally reaching out to Lorne in his own elitist way. To Lorne, it seemed that Simon openly being disgusted with manual laborer work communes deviated from the normal, prideful worker mantra that was force-fed to laborers and people working under communal servitude. It's not what they make it out to be, Lorne said with a humble demeanor. How do you think we make it? Simon asked. I would imagine dangerous. Perhaps the domain of the unskilled, Lorne cringed, saying the tropes he had lived through. Home was hell, but home eventually begins to form its own striped badge in one's heart. Since making it to the Global Examiner, Lorne was awarded an E-residence while also affording his sister's boarding school. Lorne had achieved a considerable amount in his 29 years, considering people who do not follow placement test allocations for trade school do not get scholarships or academy opportunities. The only way would be to start at base level residence G. However, when the state's elected cooperation takes dominion on the communes, the parameters of test suddenly fluctuates depending on whatever labor vacuum is needed to be filled. When that vacuum is not filled due to incompetence or other reasons, the corporation-ran state uses resident commune demotions to indenture workers. The companies view the wasted housing, resources, and training they were not fit for to be something that must be repaid via the allocation of less desirable manual laborers. Lorne could not achieve a higher education without achieving rank-ups in lower lever communes or getting vouchers. So that is what he did. Classless. Simon said sharply while not staring directly into Lorne's eye since he first called him over. Classless, he repeated, only this time making sure his eyes met Lorne's. Well, I am here now. I am not going back, nor will I stoop for any placement below that of which I achieved. Your company has intentions and has expressed those to mine. My company has intentions to fulfill that. I have my own personal intentions, and in order to achieve that I will do what is necessary. I was chosen because of my work. Work that will bring Mulls, Mr. Bruck, and you satisfactory. What are you getting out of this? Residence D, Lorne said. Absolutely. Huge upgrade from your current. One of the standout features is you can have a family members join your commune. Huge distinction from the slums and work dormitories. One question though, Lorne. Yes? Why did you lie about your sister? Excuse me. I too have a son at placement test age. Simon began. They got their results in autumn? Yes, Lorne said. So, I can pry you further for information, or you can amuse me with refining my intuition. Lorne was quiet. Your sister. If she was mentally disadvantaged, she could be placed in a source center and be given a moderately peaceful existence. She is not. She scored low, or not of your expectation. You fear she will be placed in a corporate internship commune instead of an academy. He paused while tapping his chin. Yes, she is not disadvantaged. She is special. Special in a way you, and others believe is not worth the laborious and dangerous life she is destined for. So please, Lorne, humor me. Humor me with telling me what she placed on those test tubes I and everyone else dread so much. 4 MAPEP, Lorne spoke. His blood pressure squealed in his ear like a steam valve about to burst. APEP. Simon's pupils expanded like a cat's eye in front of a dangling toy. Yes, an obscure one. Clearly not given the proper resources and time to be adequately investigated for its value. Why is that, Lorne? Simon said with an expressionless voice that was either intrigued or sarcastic. Because we do not belong in the fucking mines. Lorne's voice was low but direct, and his jaw clenched with every syllable, as his temperament was no longer holding back his eyes that met Simon's in a fierce psychological combat that only they were aware of. We? Simon said lowly. Simon did not give in, and both their pupils were not broken till a shuffle of boots in the opposite end of the room stole their attention. It was Marston, leaning sloppily against the bench, but his eyes were fixed on both of them with no subtleness in his agenda to eavesdrop. Apophis, Simon said. An agent of chaos. You know a lot about placement scores, Lorne grinned. You looking to transfer? You are not fooling me, Lorne. We have intentions. Your jobs has intentions. You have intentions. You may think that I am here to stifle that. You are wrong. I am here to remind you that everything will go as needed if you just continue on with what you are intended to do. Simon's eyes squinted hard. It was unclear to Lorne why. But it seemed as if he was either trying to understand something about Lorne or his own place in this machine. I understand, Lorne said, standing up from the bench. Once again, you and the company will not be disappointed in my work. Then you are dismissed for now, Lorne. I appreciate you taking the time to get to know me and my function. Lorne stepped back and nodded before turning back to the benches. Only when he returned to the seating quarters, he chose the bench in front of Marston. Remember, everybody, the next 9 hours there will be excessive humming. Then the remaining of that time will be followed with excessive turbulence. A gleeful man in tight-fitting suit announced while standing over his meal in the 4-tabled mess hall. His badge was marked with 2 stripes, yet unlike the rest of the men at his table, he lacked military-grade shoulder or knee pads. He also lacked the build that implied he did much physical at all. The men in the room were all uncertain if they could continue eating, or if he would continue blurting out random policies and reminders. He seemed to be enjoying his pow-wow with the security officials, all of which appeared to regard him highly, though it was clear he too was a guest to the vessel's security team. The man had short dark hair, and a deep tan that contrasted greatly with his pale eye sockets. Imprints of the UV-resistant goggles common on supervising roles. He was clearly from Earth. Though his role was unclear to Lorne, he knew not to take his charismatic behavior for granted. The chatter of the hall continued as it did before. The beep emitting from the wrist pad of one of the security officers closest to the man went off as his eyes widened. He backed out of his seat, while furiously trying to chew and swallow his recently stuffed mouth. Lord Vance. What? Are you choking? The man shouted, shaking the guard named Vance's shoulder. Then he began to laugh. He has left the bridge and is headed to the mess hall," the guard named Vance said, standing up with his tray of food. The leisurely spirit drained from the other man's face as he also stood up. He took a quick moment and scanned the room. "Excuse me, yes, you two. Please consolidate your seating with each other," he said without ever making eye contact at the engineers he was pointing at. The men shuffled in confusion, then quickly scurried to squeeze both of their eating trays closer together. He said, pointing at Marston, "Hedgeham, the medical examiner, Lorne and another." He pointed for them to move to the table he was originally sitting at with the guards. "Yes, your accommodations are all appreciated," the man said with a smile that revealed dynamic crow's feet along his eye sockets' tan lines. He turned around to face the door and awaited. A spewing of compressed air emitting from the hall outside the entrance pierced the momentary silence the mess hall endured in anticipation. Several footsteps. The gaskets squealed at the entrance, and the sharp-cornered shoulders of more security officials walked in. Amongst them was Simon. Shortly after 7, other higher-ranked officials slipped in as well, seating themselves at the table next to Lorne's. Lorne tried to get a read on their position, but found himself distracted. While scanning their uniforms for striped badges, his eye caught one of the officials. He understood the importance of maintaining his first impression. However, he failed to not look back. He thought she was beautiful. Her short dark hair swished with every head turn that revealed her beautiful jawbone. Her dark brown pupils swam in the whiteness of her eyes, like a betta fish in a bowl. Her eyes had the capacity to express both their grace when they came into contact with the observer, or humility as they fluttered to the ground. She was petite, but also curvy. Despite the focus and professionalism she carried in her demeanor, she seemed incapable of blotting out the human element of her experience, a quality that seemed non-existent in the corporate world, a quality that made her feel approachable, yet undeserving of unwanted attention. Once she sat, and Lorne was aware he needed self-policing. He managed on taking his gaze away from her. Yet he felt a sense of comfort knowing that if he did so please, she was still within sight to be admired. Amongst the cluster of officials, there was a bizarrely pale man who appeared to suffer from alopecia or some other hair growth complication. His smug mannerisms seemed to void out his unusual appearance, somehow making his apparent worth raise in stock to Lorne. After all, if Lorne's kin was destined for the laborious life, then this man must have some skill or quality that sets him far apart from the average skilled worker. Their uniforms all matched like Lorne's generic blue mole's uniform they gave him upon arrival. He became suspicious when he realized even Marston was wearing the same thing. In fact, the squeaky people pleaser and the various shuttle and security personnel were the only staff that had distinguishable apparel. Lorne looked around the mess hall, recognizing that he was foolish for thinking people were aware or not that he was a guest, as he wore the same jumpsuit with a thermal one-piece under as most of the cafeteria. "I was not expecting this full of a mess hall," the short man with tan lines announced as the arriving group of administrators grew larger. "The meeting ended early, Mitz. After all, I figured our early arrival might alleviate you," one of the men with a thick rectangular beard and padded armor said as he entered. He patted the man they called Mitz on the back as he passed and gestured a few other armored guards to stand with him against the back wall. Mitz took a deep breath and continued the smile that Lorne now believed was only performative. "No, Rand. The security fleet and I have made great company. It has been my pleasure to get to know them. Isn't that right, Vance?" Vance had already continued eating again as his mouth was too full to agree. Both the Rand and Mitz looked at him with a concerned look. Not for his well-being, just his adequacy. "An elite bunch we got here." Mitz spoke with his eyes positioned to the officials at the table next to Lorne's. Another grey-haired and olive-skinned official walked in, speaking into his watch, holding some instruments used to detect unregistered weaponry. Right behind was a broad-shouldered man in a chrome flamboyantly bedazzled suit. 2 bluish-grey eyes sat on his large head. His hair was neatly placed grey swirl, but clearly a transplant. His barrel-shaped torso was adorned with a badge that had no stripes, just a single diamond at his chest. Amongst the corporate world, it had become more and more normal for agents to be expected to maintain a nice physique. His large body, adorned in a curiously extravagant suit, indicated an authority greater than all-encompassing stigmas that other elite officials endured. The man was Mr. Barak. His face, similar to the man named Mitz, had a facial expression that was either smug or performative. But the nonchalant expression he carried halted as the tension in the room drained the candid nature of the mess hall. The security officials that entered the room had all stood against the walls, as the officials stood at their chairs. Lorne's table quickly followed, and the man named Mitz stood front and center. "Mr. Brooks, while we are honored with your presence, I feel that this quarter does not suit a man of your position," Simon said. No, Simon. I have ate alone in my own quarters this entire trip. It is me who is honored to eat amongst you all here, Mr. Bruck said. Everyone, some expressionless, and others entranced, all gave a small applause. He continued, I thought, if the mess hall is good enough for them, then it ought to be good enough for me. The pitter-patter of subtle applause arose again. Mr. Bruck sat down at a table with Simon on his side. The door squealed open again as several young men in grey one-piece suits with apron flaps attached to the front glided into the room, holding metallic carriers filled with food trays. In one swift process, they placed food trays in front of everyone except Mr. Bruck and the original occupants of the mess hall. Lorne found himself capable of ignoring the girl, though every time her head tilted his direction, he felt his stomach jump with excitement. He wanted to look at him. He wanted her to notice. Simon scanned the room. His eyes met Marston's. Marston was unamused. His eyes rolled over to Lorne. Lorne was staring directly back at him. Once again, the entrance gasped as the door slid open. Another grey-suited man, holding a singular tray, arrived and placed it in front of Mr. Bruck to his satisfaction. It looks fantastic, he said to the service agent who sped walked away with a noticeable elation. Mr. Bruck's face glowed with an authentic red that made him appear much more human than Simon and the other security officials at his table. Being a small and crowded mess hall, Lorne did not see what was on Mr. Bruck's food tray. Lorne could only see that it was substantially more colourful and larger than the company-issued and flavourless mess hall cuisine the rest of them received. Looks like our dining experience isn't suffice after all, Marston whispered to himself. Lorne scowled at him. Marston responded with an eye roll. Lorne felt frustration building. He knew he could prove that he is unaffiliated, but it was not himself that Lorne was concerned about. He feared that Marston did not recognize the consequences of being in an environment unregulated by the state. Despite being compromised by a complex oligarchy, the state at least would protect people with some form of regulation if tied to a commune. However, while traveling through the vast expanses of space, Lorne knew it was essential to understand that corporations are the ones who create and enforce regulation. Marston, whether justified or not, was letting his contrarian nature make him stand out. Lorne began to suspect it was intentional. The all-encompassing forecast of orange and black smoke alternated the sound of steel slamming against the rustic mechanical monoliths like the heartbeat of Kratos. Billowing fumes and steam release from various components of the mine shaft's machinery as the fumes slither through the metallic framed scaffolding that line the copper red and tar-stained arcades of the cave walls. The grinding of machines sound like the teeth of whatever this mysterious sleeping planet once was. Mr. Bruck read aloud from the chrome-colored tablet. Wrist strap. He continued after examining the room for its complete attention. The life we inserted into these caves only illuminated with the flames produced in machinery, and the blue fluorescent strips welded into the cave ceilings seemed to spew from every cavity like the breath of a hibernating creature. In addition, the melodic hum that no machine could mimic without sentience echoes through the hall. Yet no single entity could be the sole source. The sound of a rhythmic moan. The moan is not of agony, nor is it of sorrow. The moan is harmonic invitation for every worker to be aligned with something bigger than their own personal achievement. It is a call of a valor and understanding. It is a call of solidarity and completeness, an acknowledgement to the power of integrity, and a testament to the importance of prosperity. The black tar-covered hazmat suits persevere through the temptations to surrender to pain or the excessive heat. Yet here the worker is, amongst the brave warriors who refuse to leave each other behind in the war against themselves. Every word absorbed by the room with a fierce concentration. Some, like the Earthman named Mitz, and other corporate office-oriented administrators froze in a concentration as they tried to decipher the true meaning. The security fleet and laborers of the company carried their chins high and their eyes solemn. A validation that was desperately needed had rained upon the nutrient-deprived soil. A feeling of revitalization echoed through the nerves in their spine as the hair rose to the back of their necks. And in that soil, a seed that was neglected found a will to grow through the rugged terrain. A mere acknowledgement as a reward for the unbending will to carry out one's duty. They found a piece of themselves celebrated as the subject of Mr. Bruck's words. Lorne did not feel the same empowerment, nor did he feel lost about the meaning of Mr. Bruck's choice of words, because Lorne knew they were not his words to begin with. They were Lorne's. Lorne looked at the girl again. Her eyes were closed, but her chin was high. Did she understand, or was this just a ploy to prove her sincere engagement? Could she relate, or was she a product of convenient circumstances inherited through nepotism from parents who could navigate this Byzantine existence? Lorne wanted someone to trust. His heart felt like it slowed down, and his hands began to sweat profusely. He looked over to Marston at his side. Marston winked at Lorne and gave him a nudge. The room was quiet. Mr. Bruck waited for it to sink in. "If I may." It was incredibly moving. Simon broke the silence. Another moment of silence followed, and it seemed as if the lack of response from Mr. Bruck meant Simon had spoke too soon. Perhaps he had felt it needed more time to be appreciated, more time to be savoured. Lorne wanted recognition for his work, yet still felt it was best to evade the radar. That being told, his paranoia had creeped in his mind like an early morning coastal fog. Perhaps he hated it, and this was some form of test to evaluate the competence of his elites. Perhaps he intended for his bloodhounds to sniff out the heretic. After another brief pause that made Simon visibly tense, Mr. Bruck spoke slowly. "Yes, Simon, absolutely. I would expect a man whom I have come to know as well as you would feel the undeniable merit expressed in that passage." Simon had nodded his head with the satisfaction of making the right call, though Lorne observed a dynamic response that could only be described as jealousy coming from the man named Mitz. "Sir, I must also say I found it great as well," Mitz said, raising his hand. Mr. Bruck nodded at him and looked back in the direction of the other tables. "Well, as most of you know, Mols Co. does not own refineries in Mars. It is another corporation, despite we do work closely together. Martian oxygen refineries connected to state-sponsored companies that work in subterranean communes is a rough patch of work." Mr. Bruck's face had a rehearsed look of solidarity. "Yes, and meticulous policy and procedure is designed to help your trusted state-sponsored company ensure that these roles are reserved for criminals or people who had problematic placement scores," Mitz announced in compliance with Mr. Bruck's announcement. Mr. Bruck raised an eyebrow at Mitz, who seemed incapable of not blurting out. "But, through the grace of corporations like us, we have given opportunities to rise." Mr. Bruck spoke again, making sure he would not be interrupted. "Opportunity is not a destination, it is a doorway. The nature of our business is in many ways remarkably like the Martian refineries trying to sustain the subsurface world. There is 27 billion people on Earth, about 48 million on Mars. There is another 14 billion people living in various space stations and satellite communes throughout the solar system. This is not because some would rather never see the sunset or feel a waterfall. If all 42 billion people were meant to experience a waterfall, then very soon there would be no one able to touch a waterfall. We are not destined to struggle because of a lack of resources. We are destined to struggle because duality of our existence calls upon it. The moment we have evaded the challenges of life, we fall victim to the real complacency of life. The inevitable decay within all of us that festers in mediocrity as we comfort seek ourselves away from the hierarchy of competence is our greatest enemy. Thus, those who lack the personal potential to reach their true individual prosperity must be funneled into the righteous collective exertions guided by businesses and its directives." Lorne noticed the room's composure seemed stray from the solemn silence to an ease in tension. Did they feel the same way as Lorne? The admiration of the tenacious labourers he had experienced before was meant to be an ode to the unthanked. It was meant to express selflessness required in accepting servitude. It was meant to pay homage to the colonization of Mars, but also acknowledge the lack of regard in human life. Humankind sees the castle we intend to siege, and we create these power structures to act as siege engines. Yet we forget the cannon fodder is the millions of lives that get sacrificed to complete tasks below their potential in unlivable conditions. Somehow, Mr. Bruck had used his corporate might to bend the will of Lorne's words like a silo of Moll's mold is used to advance man through the ever-changing obstacles of space. The takeaway Mr. Bruck got from this passage of this article revealed a lot to Lorne. Mr. Bruck's selected theme of pride in your work that he embraced operated on a level of depth that could only be acquired through the naivety of thinking a corporation's success is stemmed in its integrity. Here Lorne was hearing the demagoguery at its finest. Now, if I am correct, we have sourced outside outlets to explore with us the truth of our operations in its coming days, Mr. Bruck said while looking at the security for clarity. Simon nodded and stood up swiftly. His eyes skipped over Marston and landed directly on Lorne. Lorne's eyes met Simon's, and with a language of eye gestures that they miraculously became fluent. Simon gestured him to volunteer himself. "You know the intention," he thought. "Sir, I cannot thank you enough for the hospitality the firm has provided me so far. I am ecstatic to show you all what I can do." Lorne stood up from his seat. "What you can do, no Lorne, you have proven that, and that is why we chose you." Mr. Brucks was standing from his seat across the small, crowded hall. "Well, I am pleased you enjoyed that piece," Lorne responded now with his hands clasped behind his back. Are you all aware of that? Mr. Bruck said, sitting down, looking at the attentive room, patiently waiting to eat. That passage I read was from this young man. Memoirs of the Refineries. Yes, this young man may be an outsider to our company, but I see in him principles that align with our mantra pledge. Simon's eyes widened as he realized the passage he had just admired was from Lorne. Lorne, now standing, could see the room better. He took this opportunity to look at her again. Only this time she was looking back, with her chin high and eyes locked on his own. Mitz, why don't you lead the team in our mantra pledge? Mr. Bruck said while sitting deeper in his chair as everyone else in the room simultaneously rose from their seats. We are the Mole's force. Mitz blurted out to sound powerful, yet when seen amongst the rest of the standing room, it became apparent that he was much smaller in stature. He continued, and everyone in the room followed his lead. United in company, together we rise. Integrity trialed by flame, no matter the size. For prosperity and expansion and the comrade who dies. We eat in the ship, we sink in the ship, ocean or skies. The room collected and sat back in their seats in silence. Mr. Brooke, seated the whole time, pointed to Lorne. You knew the mantra. I saw your mouth moving. Mr. Bruck said with a full mouth chomping away at something that emitted steam with each bite. Yes, Lorne said in an anxiety-riddled voice. Mr. Bruck's eyebrow raised in confusion, and his finger raised in the air about to point once more. Sir, I am sure you are aware that we will need some time to have our security do full sweep of subterranean extraction shafts after we arrive and get settled. In tomorrow, Simon said, leaning into Mr. Bruck while also having his eyes fixed on Lorne. He spoke to him with eyes once more, but this time it said something like, "Thank me later." Nonsense. We have our own security already there. I see no reason to. Mr. Bruck paused and his eyes fizzled off Lorne and onto Simon. Simon glanced once more at Lorne and continued engaging in his conversation with his boss. Guess they did not dig too deep into the background check, Marston said with a look of relief. Makes sense to why you were here, Lorne mumbled. Ha. Well, if I would have known I could have been a kiss-ass to get here, I would have left too. Marston spoke low. Wait, you left Moles? The man named Hejam asked with no restraint. Marston and Lorne both gritted their teeth and gestured him to pipe down. Hejam continued, but in a whisper. Why? Shut the fuck up, Marston whispered back. Only it seemed to not have the same effect at Hejam's controlled whisper, because the profanity in his language pierced the professional atmosphere like the breakage of glass. At different paces of urgency, everyone in the room shifted their head to look at Marston. Marston glared at his tray and shook his head in frustration. Another signal. That seemed too unhinged for this unauthentic ceremony of a last meal. Simon's jaw was tightly clenched as he stared at Marston. Marston took a deep breath and rolled his eyes. Lorne tried not to make eye contact, but he could not help to look at Marston. He seemed more annoyed than scared. I do not know where you stand or what you are up to, but do what you do best. And I am going to do what I do best, Marston said quietly, looking at no one. It felt cryptic to Lorne because he saw a few different ways it could be interpreted. The chatter of the mess room picked up again. Only around Lorne all that could be heard was utensils scraping at trays of food that had gone cold before Vance got the notification.